Welcome to the Free Birth Podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Today on the show, we have Melissa from the UK. After a wonderful first birth with midwives in hospital, Melissa became obsessed with birth and was left shocked to realize how uncommon a positive birth in hospital was. Pregnant with her second, she chose to stay home and have a free birth, to then be harassed by Child Protective Services and even have the cops busting into her home. After a wonderful home birth, Melissa was quickly left traumatized by being attacked by social services for almost a year. Pregnant again with her third, Melissa blazed her own path and made this birth her own.
My name is Melissa Thomas. I have 3 children, aged 6, 4 and 2. I live in Nottingham in the UK. I'm also a service user representative for maternity services here. And I got into that through my birth experiences. So I had my first daughter when I was 24. It was a few days before my 25th birthday, and none of my friends had children, and I'm an only child, and so I didn't know anything about birth other than what I'd seen on TV. My midwife was really nice. I saw the same midwife.
It was in hospital?
We see midwives through our GP here. Mm-hmm. So it is a doctor's surgery, which, not knowing anything about birth beforehand, that's your kind of expectation, really, that it's in a clinical environment. And I don't remember birth choices ever being discussed with me with my midwife. It was just presumed that I would give birth in hospital. And so I booked in to the hospital. And I didn't really give it any consideration because, well, I was a bit freaked out about the fact that I was going to have a baby, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I was in the final year of my degree at the time.
Oh my gosh.
I did finish.
So the baby was a little bit of a surprise?
It was a surprise, yes. I'd never planned to have children.
Wow.
But it was a really straightforward pregnancy. I was really concerned about labour. I didn't know what that was going to feel like, and I couldn't seem to get any clear information about what labour was actually going to be like and how I would know that I was in labour. And everything that people told me was just pain. So I was like, right, well, but nothing seems to be happening. I had a due date, although there was some questions about my due date. So when I went in, I had a scan at 12 weeks, and there were some questions about the date when I went in for a second scan, and they changed the due date. And that's, I think, the first point that I started questioning things. So I didn't really understand how they were working out the date. It seemed to me that it was based on the length of the fetus. Well, that's variable.
And sure. Well, and it's it's so mind blowing that they don't explain it.
Yeah, it really is. And yet treat it as though it's some kind of definite information that we cannot question.
Yeah.
So I was overdue, in brackets, and I was booked to see a consultant rather than a midwife because they wanted to discuss options for induction. So this was when I was about 7 days over my due date. I went to see the consultant and I queried the dating scan with the consultant, who was incredibly rude to me and told me that I had to have an induction, otherwise I might increased the chance of killing my baby.
Oh my gosh. Which, by the way, let me just say that 41 weeks, and actually 41 in a couple of days, is the highest likelihood of when a first-time mama goes into labor. You know, so you were just entering your real birthing time, but the way that it's set up, because of this crazy tiny margin after 42, you know, of very, very slightly increased potential stillbirth, that they induce everybody at 41.
I know, as if the baby somehow knows the exact man-made time that we've created. Right. And it was just, it was very upsetting, really, and I didn't know that I could question it. So when I was booked in for the induction, I just went away with this date, and it was, I think that was the Tuesday, and the induction was booked for the Monday coming up. And so it was on my mind, I guess. And then on the Friday, we went out, I think, me and my partner. And then when I came home at about 11 o'clock, I thought that I felt something, but because I didn't know. And so I tried to put it to the back of my mind and go to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, he was fast asleep, and it was starting to feel a little bit different. And now I was really clinging on to the idea that this might be labour. But it was much slower than I expected it to be. The build-up was really subtle, I suppose is the word. And so I think I woke him up at that point. But he'd been drinking, so he just went back to sleep. And I didn't sleep at all, foolishly. I stayed up and woke him up at 8 o'clock. And at this point, I still wasn't sure, but it was much more intense. And I was really scared as well, because I didn't know what to expect. And because of all the stories of pain, I suppose. And so I called my mum. Yeah, and my mum said, "Oh, it sounds like you're in labour," whatever that means. And
this like ambiguous mystery thing. Yeah, totally.
I know. And she was asking me to count the timings of contractions, which now I've had 3, to be honest. Just doesn't mean anything as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. It really doesn't. It's no indication of...
No, there really isn't. And especially like every labor, you know, a first-time labor, you know, I think you see a pattern a little bit more, but with a second, it kind of pattern goes out the window.
Yes, it really does.
Like by the time you get the hang of it, it no longer matters. Which isn't that like so parenting right there? Like
that's absolutely true. Yeah. So I called the midwife after that, and the midwife told me to just try and relax and stay at home as long as possible. And so I was thinking, okay, how am I supposed to relax? I'm about to have a baby. But we stayed home for a while. I think my partner was just watching TV, but I was quite emotional because this was an unexpected pregnancy and I didn't know how it was going to change my life. I had a lot of anxieties about what having a baby was actually going to be like. And so I found it really hard to relax. And at about 1 o'clock, I think, it was starting to get a bit too intense and I wanted some reassurance from a midwife. So neither of us drive, so we took a taxi to the hospital. And things slowed down in the taxi, and I was really worried that when I got there, they would think I was wasting their time, which it's just so typical, isn't it, that you feel that way about your own labour, that you're wasting someone else's time. So
that's how we're trained to be.
Programmed, isn't it?
Well, and you know, I always think about this with media is like all that we ever see on the movies about birth is a water gush, a scream, and a baby. And so, you know, when all eyes are on you and it's all about your birth, and actually nobody knows that a lot of birth is actually pretty boring, not to the birthing mother, but kind of to everybody else. It's pretty slow. There's not much going on for a lot of it. Externally, internally, there's a lot going on, of course. I think that a lot of women feel this oh, I'm not going fast enough. And then it causes all this stress and self-consciousness. And yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, definitely. And that can affect the labour goes so much, having those kinds of feelings that you're a burden to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I got to the hospital and I suppose at the time I thought that they knew what they were doing. I didn't think that I knew what I was doing. And so I just wanted them to tell me what to do. And so I didn't question anything. And when I got there, they examined me. And they said I was about 4 centimetres.
Wait, you cut up. How many centimeters?
4.
4? Mm-hmm.
4 centimetres, yeah. And so my partner remembered that I'd wanted to use the pool, and he asked on my behalf if we could use the pool, which I'm really pleased he did, because I wouldn't have asked again because I felt like a burden. Mm-hmm. And the midwife said the pool was currently in use, but because I was only 4 centimetres, she'd run me a bath instead, and hopefully by the time I'd finished in the bath, the pool would be free. So I went and got in the bath, and it was just amazing getting in that water. It really helps. But I think that's when things started getting really intense, and I started to feel really sick. And I don't think I stayed in there for very long, although about an hour, and I decided I wanted to get out because I felt so unwell, and I was starting to hold my breath because it was so intense. And the midwife, I remember her stroking my back and just saying to me, "Don't forget to breathe." And it was honestly just the most simple, but one of the most amazing things somebody could say. And I was like, yeah, of course, I need to breathe, don't I? And that really helped. And the pool was actually free at that point, which was very fortunate. And so we walked down to the pool room. They started running it, and they had a really big birthing bowl in the middle of the room with some long lengths of fabric hanging from the ceiling, a bit like rebozo. Mm-hmm. And so I sat on the ball and pulled onto these lengths of fabric with my partner sat behind me. And that was incredibly helpful as well. I think it was at that point that it started to become much more internal. I started blocking out the rest of the room. And you know, in fairness, for a hospital environment, it was a great room. It was well designed. The bed certainly wasn't the focus, and I don't ever remember being on a bed in the room as well.
Wow, that's so midwife, amazing.
Yeah, it really was. There was just bean bags everywhere, and she turned the lights down. Yeah. She turned the lights down, she closed all the blinds.
Sorry, was it like a birthing suite? Was it was on labor and delivery floor, or was it like its own little birth center?
So I think it is a midwife-led, but it is part of the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so consultant-led is sort of an elsewhere, because you are supposedly not allowed to use the pool if you are consultant-led, and so this was a midwife-led section.
I'm assuming consultant means like obstetrician.
Yes, okay. That's for high risk pregnancy, but of course the criteria for high risk is questionable.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I was considered low risk, and so I was allowed to use the pool. And she turned all the lights down and closed the blinds, and she put some music on. I really hadn't considered any of this at all. Wow. She just did it, and she was barely in the room as well, which at the time I was actually quite anxious about. Mm-hmm. I was like, why isn't she here? I really need a midwife to be here to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. But afterwards, when I reflected on it, I'm actually incredibly grateful that she wasn't there. And so she came back and helped me. Because why? Sorry?
Because why?
Because I think that it helped me to be able to focus on myself rather than listening to what somebody else was telling me. If she had been there, I imagine there might have been more interference, and I would have had more of an expectation that she would say, oh, you need to do this next, or you need to do that, and that would have been problematic in terms of me being able to be internal and to just let go, really. And so just having my partner there, who I trusted completely, was really beneficial, I think. But she did come back to help me get in the pool, but then she quickly had to leave again. I think that the labour ward was very busy, and when I got into that pool, it was like I was in a dreamland. I was just completely somewhere else entirely, and I think I must have been in there for about an hour or so, and I remember saying to my partner, what time is it, because the midwife said she was going to come back and examine me, and he lied to me and he told me it was closer to the time that she said she was going to come back, and I'm so pleased he did, because I think that changed something, because I felt the security in the fact that she was coming back. I just let go and I started to push. I just could not do it. It just happened. And I didn't think anything of it. I just did it. And then, I don't know, a little while after I started doing that, the midwife came back and my partner said to her, oh, she's pushing. Is that okay? And the midwife was like, oh, no, whoa, you need to slow down. I need to examine you first. And I just didn't care at that point. I don't think she did actually examine me, because I think she realised it was too late. And I'd agreed to have a student come and watch as well, because the student that was working at the time hadn't seen a water birth before. So the student came in, and she suggested, I was kind of floating in the water, and she suggested that I get onto my hands and knees. And so I did that, and I think I did spend a good hour and a half pushing, but I don't remember the midwives there at all, because they were behind me. And she did suggest that I touch my daughter's head, and I did, and it was just the most incredible feeling. I'll never forget the feeling of her soft hair. And she was born at 7:30, and the midwife just quickly grabbed her and just put her to my chest, and I held her in the water, and I was just stunned. I'd never seen a newborn baby before, and it was just unbelievable to see this baby, and that I'd just given birth. I just couldn't believe it. I didn't really know how to feel. I don't think I was just so shocked. And I spent actually quite a long time in the pool, and this is very unusual in hospitals. I think I was in there for 1.5 hours, and there was a changeover of midwives at the time as well, which might have helped. And then when the second midwife came, she let me cut the cord, which is also not usually something that's given as an option to people unless you ask for it.
And what about your placenta?
Yeah, well, the placenta was still, I still hadn't birthed the placenta at this point, and so, which is highly unusual. Usually if you're in a hospital environment,
exactly,
if you haven't given birth to the placenta within, I'd say 15 minutes, people are getting twitchy about it. But I was actually in the pool for an 1.5 hours, and then got out. I cut the cord first myself, and then I got out. And I think that, I'd started to feel a little bit anxious again, because I knew the placenta was still to come. But the midwife was amazing. She put blankets around me and she got me to squat on the floor, and the placenta just came straight away. And in all the time I've spent speaking to people about their birth stories, mine is a very unusual one in terms of first babies as well. In a hospital, you very rarely get this level of undisturbed birth in a hospital environment. But I didn't realise that at the time. I thought this was normal. And it wasn't until I joined a first-time parents group that I realised how unusual it was. So I think my daughter was about 6 weeks old when I started going to this group, and I was just so obsessed, I guess, by this birth experience. I really wanted to know what others' experiences were like, and they were telling me the stories that I just found so shocking about induction and forceps and tears and all sorts of things that I just didn't experience. And it was then I realised that my birth had been amazing.
When compared to what else was out there.
Yes, and these people, they were really emotional and they didn't want to talk about it, whereas I just wanted to talk about it all the time. And so I don't know. Have you heard of the TV program One Born Every Minute? Well, we have a show in the UK called One Born Every Minute, and it's quite controversial, where they film a labour and delivery ward in different locations across the UK. It's been on since, I don't know, it must be 7 or 8 years now, I think, and it has changed over time because there has been a lot of complaints about it. But this is something that sort of informs people about what birth is like, and it is highly medicalised program. But to feed my desire to understand birth more, I started watching it, even though I'd not previously had any interest, but I just was so curious. And I just couldn't stop asking questions. I couldn't leave it at that point. And so I got some books about birth as well after that. I got Birth, A History by Tina Cassidy.
I love that book.
Yeah, and that was really eye-opening. And I started thinking maybe I could become a midwife. Because at that point, you know, I just finished my degree when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I didn't really know what I was going to do since I'd had a baby. So I started looking into it, and then I came across doulas, which I'd never heard of before. And so I found some doula preparation courses, and I ended up speaking to one of the women who runs the course, so that she could help me decide which route to take, really. And I ended up doing her course, which was incredibly informative in terms of understanding birth, because, you know, doing a doula preparation course, they teach you about the physiology of birth, which you don't get on an antenatal course, which is quite shocking when you think about it. And it was really eye-opening. So my daughter was 16 months old when I did the last course, and 2 weeks before I went to do it, I found out I was pregnant with my second. So right from the beginning, I knew I wanted it to be different, because now I knew that home birth was an option.
Did you do prenatal care with a midwife or no?
I did until I was 30 weeks.
Okay.
And at 30 weeks we moved house, and I didn't see my midwife because of where I moved to as well. I was in the same county, but because it was sort of outside of the city, I was under a different branch of midwives, and so my care was going to be transferred to this other branch of midwives. So I didn't see anyone for a while because we had some communication issues when I moved into the house. And that time when I didn't speak to them was just the most liberating time. And so from that point onwards, I decided I didn't want to have any further care. And so I wrote to them and I told them so, which I thought would be straightforward, but it wasn't. So then the supervisor calls me after this, and she's concerned about the choices that I'm making. But I think more she's concerned that I'm being pressured into making that decision rather than that it's an unusual choice, although it certainly is. So then she kind of goes through a load of questions with me just to make sure she feels comfortable with it. And she says, yeah, you know, this is your decision. I'll write a letter to you just to say that it's understood that this is your choice, and And so that was great. I was really pleased because I'd heard stories about people not getting this kind of support. And I felt free to enjoy the rest of my pregnancy, which was great. But, you know, I had some negative things happen as well. I mean, I don't know how much in detail you want me to go about what actually happened around this birth. So I think when I was about 36 weeks, I got a letter from social services.
Wow.
Yeah, I was surprised. They said, you know, they didn't actually give me any details about why they were contacting me. They just said that they'd received a referral for our family and they wanted to know if they could offer me any support. And so I called them to tell them I didn't want their support, but I couldn't get in touch with anyone at the office. So I left a message and then I wrote back to them. And I assumed that they were contacting me because I was planning to have an unassisted birth. I made that assumption and I detailed in the letter I had the right to make that choice. And I didn't hear from them, so I assumed all was well. And then my son was born in September, it was, and on the morning I woke up. I just woke up and I think I knew. It wasn't like last time, but I just felt really emotional, and I asked my partner to stay off work, and he did. And midday, nothing had really picked up, and so again, I was worried that I'd got it wrong. I did some yoga. I've been doing yoga through the pregnancy, and about 5 o'clock I went for a walk, and then I came home. I started making some food, and I went to the toilet and lost my mucus plug, which didn't happen last time. And at that point I knew, and I was really excited. I was like, I was right. I am in labour. And it started to pick up gradually, but my daughter was still around. And it wasn't until she went to sleep at about 8 o'clock, and then it really, really started to pick up at that point. And I asked my partner to run a bath for me. I was sort of just sat on the bedroom floor, leaning on the side of the bed. But I could barely move. And he ran the bath and he was waiting for me. And I was like, I can't do it. I can't get in the bath. I'd hired a doula as well, and I'd spoken to her and I'd said I was in labour, but she lived quite far away, so I was casual about whether she made it or not. But he helped me up. I don't know how I still don't know how I got up off that floor. It was just so hard. But when I got into the water, it was similar to my first birth. I guess it was even more kind of surreal this time. When I got into the water, just the whole world seemed to stop. And I knew I was just not getting out of that bath again. Because my doula was coming, she was bringing a pool as well, but it was pointless. But I couldn't even speak. It was just me in the bath, and that was it. That was the whole world. Nothing else existed outside of that. And then the doula arrived, and my partner went downstairs. They were trying to find the pool, like the hose and stuff, I think. But I was just in a world of my own, and I was sat in the bath, and then I leaned back and just let out this just massive roar, I guess, and started bearing down. And I was kind of reclining, leaning back. I had hold of the handles on the side of the bath, and I think my doula recognised the sound. She knew. She came upstairs. The bathroom light had been on, so she turned it off, and she sat down next to the bath. And I think it must have only been 20 minutes, and he was born. Again, I put my hand down and sort of had my hand on his head, because it's just such an incredible thing to do, to hold someone's head as being born. And I lifted him up to my chest, and he was all covered in vernix, which was my daughter wasn't. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd
I'd done it again in such a completely different way as well, where I'd felt completely conscious of my body and what it was doing, which I just didn't feel the first time. But yet at the same time, I'd completely given into my body as well, and it just did whatever it had to do, and I was just along for the ride. You know, your mind just isn't there, and it was amazing. But then 7 days later, I had a social worker turn up on my doorstep, which wasn't expecting. She wasn't expecting to see me having given birth either, I don't think. She was coming because she wanted to have this discussion about my birth choices. And so we refused to let her in. And she had said if she brought back the referral papers, would we allow her entry to the house? So I said yes. And so she went back to her office and came back an hour or so later, you know, by which point we'd sought some support and they'd advised us to record the conversation. She came back and she'd escalated the case to a child protection case.
Oh my gosh.
Because my son had been born, and also because of my daughter.
Wait, also because of your daughter?
Yeah, they included her as well.
What did she have to do with it?
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay.
I still don't know. I still never really got any answers from them. But we still refused entry to the house, but we did record the conversation. But it's all quite frightening, that kind of language, you know.
Totally.
We have escalated the child protection case. It's not words you want to hear when you're suffering postpartum.
Right. What was the technical reason or concern, or was it neglect?
Well, I got the referral papers, and it was actually my community midwife who'd referred me to social services. And the reason for the referral was given as plans to self-deliver at home without medical assistance, which is no legal basis to make a referral to social services.
Wait, say that again?
It's not, there was no legal basis to make a referral to social services for this choice.
Well, that's what
that's
what I wanted to ask about. In England, are you legally allowed to birth at home? Are you allowed to choose where you want to birth? Yeah,
we have quite a lot of freedom of choice. You know, it's protected by human rights as well. But they don't. Establishments and institutions don't get it.
Right.
You know,
doesn't mean that they honor it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're informed by dominant culture, not by diversity of choice in people's lives. Dominant culture is, if you don't have a medical birth, you must be some kind of deviant.
Totally.
And so they left after about a 50-minute conversation with my partner on our doorstep, but they turned up again later that night, and they brought 2 police officers with them.
Wow.
And basically forced their way into our house, because how can you say no to that? It's putting us in a very compromising position. They came in, and I think basically they just wanted to fill in their paperwork because they'd opened this case and they had to close it. But in order to do that, they had to interview us, and we were refusing them entry until they brought the police. So the whole time was just very bullying and coercive. And, you know, it's something that when you talk about it in words, it sounds, no big deal. But the reality of experiencing something like that is very physically real and threatening. It's very, very threatening. And you feel very afraid.
Yeah.
And when you get like that, you know, you're in survival mode. And I'm concerned that my 7-day-old baby is going to be taken away from me. Which is, of course, the thoughts that go through your head when someone threatens you like that. And so this experience left me really traumatized, in all fairness. It took me months to get over it. I
bet.
I was very upset. Because after that they sent the midwives round, and then the midwives kind of did their routine stuff, did their postnatal checks, measured him, weighed him, things that I didn't really want, and I was really upset by that.
But at this point, you're just agreeing to get everyone off your back.
Yeah, I just have to at this point, just in order to get through it. And the whole thing is just really just a shambles. They just don't know what they're doing, and they don't even tell us when the case is actually closed. We have to chase them up, and then when we do chase it up, they don't even know who we are, what the case is about.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever consider getting a lawyer?
We did, yeah. We spoke to a human rights lawyer over the phone, and we also went to speak to a lawyer face-to-face who did want to take it further, but he said, it would be like a landmark case because nothing like this had ever been brought to court before. But by that point, it was difficult for me to take it any further because I did actually go through a complaints procedure with social services and with the midwives, and I had an independent investigation carried out, and it took 9 months. And I basically did it on my own as well, and it was exhausting.
Yeah.
And by that point, I think I gave up because I couldn't go any further. I received a partial apology from social services, but they wouldn't take full responsibility for it. And the midwives,
God,
of course, naturally, the midwives were found to have acted within reason, but the recommendation was that they addressed their policies around unassisted birth, which for me I think was a poor outcome. But it says it was an independent investigation, but it was still within the NHS. It was just an NHS midwife from a different county had been brought in to then.
Well, and that's where I think so many things slip through the cracks is, immediate postpartum women are probably our most vulnerable, population of people. When they experience things in birth that aren't okay, or if they experience violence or abuse or whatever, the idea of having to navigate that trauma postpartum, feed a baby, be exhausted, heal your body, and figure out how to get a lawyer and file a complaint and go against the hospital and potentially go to court, like that's just insanity to ask of a postpartum mom. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear stories all the time that could have, been a real case where they totally had grounds where things were acting, outside of informed consent or, whatever, tons of stuff. But the actual energy is like emotional and physical energy to carry a case like that within a postpartum time is almost, unheard of.
Yeah, it really is. And it really shapes that time as well because so much of it for me, I just can't remember. And I just remember it being very distressing, and I didn't realise how badly I actually felt.
Yeah.
Because the birth experience was just completely amazing. And I suppose there was some distance between my birth and then this interference. And so the two things were separate, and I needed to keep them that way because I needed to hold on to what my birth meant to me in order to survive that postpartum experience. I ended up having therapy in the end because it was just so difficult to work through.
Yeah.
But then I got pregnant with my third, and so that was kind of the ultimate healing. At first, I was really anxious.
Yeah, I was going to say it must have probably been a little scary too, though.
It was incredibly scary. I mean, at this point, I knew so much about birth, and I'd had so much experience because after my second one was born, I set up a positive birth group locally, and which I think was also in some ways a form of therapy, to be honest, just to be able to connect with other people in that way and talk about birth. And so I ran that for 18 months, and that was really good. But throughout that time, I gathered so much more experience about birth and its meaning, and I also did an online course about international women's health and human rights, which really helped give a sort of a humanistic framework to my approach about people's experiences of birth. So I kind of went into my third pregnancy just quite defiantly, really, because I knew that I was doing it my way, and nobody, I wasn't going to listen to what anybody else had to say about that. But how to assert that in a system that doesn't care about the way you feel was going to be hard. And I knew that. And I was nervous because I absolutely could not experience social services again because of the damage that it caused. So by this point, we'd actually moved to it again, but to another city. I left booking till a bit later. But when I did book in, I met the most amazing midwife. And
what do you mean book in?
So we refer to your first appointment as a booking appointment, because that's kind of when you do all of your paperwork.
So you still were willing to go do prenatal care with a midwife?
Well, this was the thing. I wanted to have an unassisted pregnancy as well, but I knew that if I had an unassisted pregnancy and an unassisted birth, when I notified that birth, it would be flagged up because it was on my records that I'd had contact with social services. And so if I'd had no contact with any kind of healthcare professional, and then they got this notification, it would likely be that social services were sent ahead of anyone else. And I didn't want that to happen because it could be considered a concealed pregnancy. So I decided I needed to book in for my own security because I would book in and opt out of care is essentially what I was going to do. And so I went to the booking in appointment with this intention. But before I even spoke, the midwife was just incredibly respectful. I'd never had things presented to me as choices before, and she presented them all as choices. And so I felt like I could talk to her, which was helpful. It was a relief because I needed to be able to trust someone in order to get what I wanted. I needed to know that I could say to somebody, you need to just let me do what I need to do without making any referrals. I had to have that security. So, like most midwives in this country work for the NHS, but there is a group of independent midwives as well. Independent midwives mostly deal with women who can't get their needs met by the system. So, a lot of like EBACs or twin births, stuff like that, because they are not accommodated for within policy and even practice. And so I did contact an independent midwife as well because I wanted to have the assurance that that she could be a buffer between me and the system should I need that, should I feel that the NHS were going to be too difficult for me to navigate. But as it turned out, the NHS were okay. So I spoke to this amazing midwife, and then after that, I requested immediately to see the supervisor at home. And we booked an appointment for her to come round so that I could just essentially say I don't want any more care. And that's what I did. And my partner was there as well, and she was really nice. She was really understanding. She obviously had a very different view and different approach to birth, but she listened, and she said, she would do whatever she could to make sure that the experience that I'd had last time didn't happen again. And that's all I needed to hear. And I was relieved, after that, all I had to focus on was being able to let go of the trauma that I still had hold of, I guess. And so I really just through the pregnancy, it was a very, very internal pregnancy, just really within myself, just trying to understand, I suppose, in some ways. And it was great because it was just so, I could just do whatever I wanted. It was just...
Yeah, you could relax.
Dying for me. Yeah, and I really relaxed into it. And it was a good job as well because he didn't come until 43 weeks. Well, those last few weeks, I think, were hard. They were really hard, but they were needed in some way.
Hard how? Because you were nervous or just physically hard?
Because just physically hard. I had 2 other children to look after.
Oh, yeah,
I've never had a
that whole thing.
That long. Yeah, exactly. I know. And it was so heavy. You know, pregnancy is just exhausting anyway. And I was a little bit nervous about what's going to happen afterwards because of what happened last time, you know. All I can see is the same pattern because I've not experienced anything differently yet. And so the worry is always going to be there that social services are going to turn up.
Did you have any nervousness about the actual birth or doing it on your own again or any of that, if other than Child Protective Services?
No, I didn't really, because I felt like I'd know. I just felt I'd know. If something wasn't right, then I knew, and I knew what to do. And not only did I know what to do for myself, but I know the difference between being able to assess something and things that I can adjust in my own environment and things that are normal, that are often portrayed as being not normal, and when to cross that line into medical care. And so I felt really confident about that. I had no questions in my mind about that really.
So walk me through your second free birth and your third birth.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time waiting. It felt like it was never going to happen. And then my son wouldn't go to sleep one night. So we were just hanging out together in bed. And I got up to go to the toilet. And when I came back, I was in labour at that point. It was like 3 a.m. And I was just like, again, I was like, is that labour? I'm not sure. I better not put too much on it just in case it isn't. And so I thought, right, I better get some sleep just in case it is. So I went to sleep and then woke up as my partner was about to leave to work. He was just stood over the bed, and I woke up and everything was a bit bleary, and then I was just straight away contraction, and I was just said to him, you can't go to work, I'm in labour. And he just couldn't believe it because we'd been waiting so long.
And you said baby came at 43 weeks?
Yeah, so this was 43 weeks exactly as well. And
I'm sorry, are you saying 42 or 43?
43.
43. Okay, so that last week, was that nerve-wracking at all for you to be so beyond this idea of a due date, or you just knew enough about it that it was normal?
I just knew enough that it was normal, and I, they have to come out.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wasn't really, again, I just felt I would know if it wasn't okay. And I think that you can say things like, I would know, and for some people that can be an inspiring thing to hear, and for others that can be a scary thing to hear. And I can understand that perspective, because saying I just know is really a hard thing for others to hear, because it's not something anybody else can understand. And it's also a hard thing for a person to explain.
Well, and it requires a huge amount of self-trust, self-confidence, maternal wisdom, and, physical connection. Like it requires, to believe. And I feel the same way I've attended enough births that I've seen that women do just know. There is, even women who, let's say, don't know a ton about it and they're on their first baby. I've seen home births where the mom just kind of is like, something's not right. And then we go to the hospital, so there is, it is hard to explain, but it is something that a lot of women do trust, or maybe not a lot, though a lot of the women I talk to, do trust. So I understand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as well, because it wasn't even just about my body or the process, but for who I was as a person and the experiences that had shaped me until that point. Nobody else knew those things about me except me. And, I think all of those things are very important as to how you actually experience birth as well. I'm just going to go and check on my youngest because I can hear him crying.
Okay.
So I'll just a couple of minutes.
Hey listeners, if you're liking what you're hearing, leave me a review on iTunes. It helps this podcast get seen by more potential listeners. Let's get these stories and this important information out there. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so I asked him to stay home and he stayed home. He went and called work. And then I stayed upstairs, I think, most of the time. Everyone else was downstairs. And then at about... Well, my daughter was at preschool at that point as well. So my partner had to go and drop her off. And I was upstairs in the bedroom. He brought me some water and he left. And I started sorting through a lot of boxes. It just felt like the thing to do. I don't know. It felt like some kind of mental preparation, I suppose. You know how like filing can be kind of therapeutic? Mm-hmm. It was a little bit like that, I think. I just sorted through all these papers and it just felt like a relief. And he came back and things were getting really tense, really intense, much more intense than the previous two. I got up and I started walking around the room, and just from the contractions, I was sweating. And I'd never experienced anything like this. So I asked my partner to go and run a bath and put some music on because I needed to distract my mind.
And no doula this time, right?
No doula this time, no. I didn't. It felt like the best decision for me this time. Mm-hmm. So we put some music on because I think my mind was very much engaged in a different way this time because of the additional layer of anxiety that I had because of the last experience. And so it was really hard to disengage my mind. Music really, really helped. And I just spent a lot of time kneeling on the floor next to the bed again like I did in my second, just swaying around a little bit. Got some cushions stacked up. And my partner ran me a bath. And then we had to go back out to go and pick my daughter up from preschool again. And I got in the bath while he was out. Oh, when I got in the water, it didn't have the same effects that it had previously. In fact, it had no effects whatsoever. And I was horrified. I was in so much pain. The pain was just so intense. And I didn't feel good. I was like, I'm not actually sure I can do this. And then my partner came back, and by that point, I couldn't speak anymore. And I think he came up and he knew. So he came up and he sat with me, and he held my hand. And it seems like just a very natural and gradual transition from being this really intense to me actually pushing. There seemed to be very little difference between the two things. It was almost as if I couldn't contain the experience within my own body. It was so big. Mm-hmm. It just felt so epic. And I had hold of his hand. And I had my mouth as wide open as I possibly could, making the loudest noises I possibly could, because it felt like the only thing that could actually get me through getting him out of my body. And my waters broke, which I hadn't experienced like this again in the other two labours. It was just a really loud pop. and my stomach visibly like wrinkled up as well. I think he must have descended. Yeah, it was just weird, and I was kind of laid on my side in the bath, and I lifted my leg up. Bent, my knee was bent. I lifted it up, and I kind of had it resting on the side of the bath. And his head started to emerge. And I put my hand down because I just love that feeling to get soft hair and scalp. And his head was coming out, and it was just, I don't know, it felt like slow motion. It really did. And then his head was out, and I could feel him moving around. And another contraction came, and he didn't come out any further. And I was like, I can't give birth to him in this position. And I know I can't. I have to stand up. So I asked my husband to help me stand up. And when I stood up, I just felt like the most grounded, powerful person that lived. And I stood up, and I kind of bent my knees, put my hands down, and he just came out in just one swoosh, I guess. And I just lifted him up to my chest, and I looked at him, and I was just like, you are massive. You are one big baby. And he was huge. He looked visibly enormous.
Like, how much do you think he weighed?
Well, what he actually weighed was 11 pounds 1 ounce.
Whoa.
My other two had been 8'8" and 8'4".
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what that translates to in kilograms. But yeah, 11 pounds 1 ounce is like 5 kilograms something, I think. But you could see, I thought when I saw him, he must be at least 10.
And did you have any vaginal tears or lacerations?
No, none. I've never torn with any of my births. But I had hold of him, and then I went to sit back down in the bath because I was really, really sore. And I couldn't move. I just could not. I felt like concrete. I was completely frozen. And then I always feel like I have to justify it, but I feel that I was in shock.
Yeah.
Like physical shock from the experience. I felt really, really awful. So I asked my partner to call a midwife. I wanted to come round. We called her and asked her, but she called the paramedics instead. She didn't come round. So the paramedics came, and they were really, really nice, actually. They were really friendly. And I cut the cord again myself, and then I still hadn't birthed the placenta, but they asked me if I wanted to go to hospital, and if I made the decision now, I would have said no, but I went. And so I went to hospital. But it was a really amazing experience going back to hospital. It was like full circle, because I got there, and the midwife, she went to go and pull on the cord to take the placenta out manually, and I was just like, you need to stop. I haven't yet fed my baby. Let me feed my baby, and the placenta will come on its own. And I did that. The placenta came. I put it in a bag. I don't want any examinations. I didn't want anything from them. So they basically didn't touch me at all. They just took me up to a ward, and then I discharged myself the next morning and went home. And it was just really quite, I hesitate to use the word, but empowering, because I just got to assert myself, I guess, in ways that I hadn't before.
Why do you hesitate to use that word?
I don't know. I guess it gets used so often. but like, it is the right word. You know, it does describe the feelings and the experience. I don't know.
Yeah, you felt powerful.
I did, and it felt very meaningful to me as well, because I remember I didn't sleep at all. I just stared at my baby all night and just had hold of him in my arms. And then the next morning, I could hear all the other women talking, and I was just like, you know, I've come so far since I was very first pregnant, that very first time. I don't belong here anymore. And I was really pleased that I was able to access their services when I thought that I needed it, without having to become tangled up in some political debate about my birth. And that was just amazing. I think that really helped me just let go.
That's like a graduation.
Yeah, and I went home and I just spent days in bed because I just felt like an enormous bruise is how I described it. And, you know, at first I felt really unsure, but then as I started recalling the birth and the feelings and everything that I'd been through since I was first pregnant, I just felt amazed. I just felt completely transformed inside and out as a person. And his birth, although it was the hardest of all three, for me was the most important, the most exceptional experience ever. It was hard. It hurt like hell. It was incredible. And do it again tomorrow.
I know. I love it. I love when women talk that way, because it is this invitation to consider, I think, for other women who haven't birthed yet, that just because birth can be hard and painful doesn't mean we have to shy away from it. You know, that we can actually really lean into that and find tremendous power and strength in a challenging, you know, confronting experience, versus like, you know, the way it gets painted is, let's try to have the most pain-free, shortest birth possible, you know, with as many interventions and avoiding it as much as possible. But really, there's so much power in just diving into it and saying yes.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy telling people about that birth, purely because I want them to hear that birth can be painful, yet amazing at the same time. Yeah, It doesn't have to be easy to make it amazing. Because I think, you know, these things do get polarized and people do get different impressions about what birth like that might mean. So, you know, because I had a free birth, people make presumptions about what that means. They think that I might be aiming for a pain-free birth or something of that notion, but that's not what it's about for me. You know, even the fact that I went to hospital afterwards is part of that experience, is important to that experience because of what it meant to me as well.
Totally.
And I think that it's an important message to just neutralize that kind of duality that's going on in birth, which is just so detrimental to people being able to, you know, achieve what they want from the experience.
Yeah, and how challenging it was, you know, in your process to just have anybody from the beginning just tell you what it was going to be like, to then your second birth, you're actually taking the power and you're birthing at your home, and then the system makes it really difficult and scary for you. And, you know, and then the third, you ask for a midwife and instead you get, you know, 911 to the hospital. It's like, but everything internally that was happening with you and the baby was always 100% normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
In all three births.
Yeah. And I guess for me as well, it just highlights how fundamentally flawed the system is and how it can never accommodate people's true needs, because it's, you know, it's a system that's built to just appease a mass population. It's not about subjective experience, and that's where we need to begin, you know, like locally,
Well, and what they're really good at is emergency. They're really good at emergency, 911 and ambulances and paramedics and high-risk doctors and NICUs and, all of that is really, really good when there's something wrong. So we're grateful for that. But when something's not wrong, nobody's trained in normal. Nobody's trained in how to be chill.
Yeah, they need they could certainly expand upon the model that they currently have to incorporate normality rather than everything being about and based around risk and fear. Mm-hmm. Because we sure do need some of that. And, but it's hard to bridge those gaps, I guess, because, to some extent, I guess that's what doulas and independent midwives can do, and they're much more experienced in just normal and it being every day and it not being risky. Mm-hmm. But it's so hard to find a way to integrate the two things to be part of the same continuum rather than it being inside the system or outside the system.
Totally. That's such a good point because as a person who's attended births for a long time, I feel like I'll spend 30 weeks with a couple teaching them about what is normal, and then they just walk into a hospital and are treated like everything is pathological and everything is everything's an emergency waiting to happen. And, that's confusing. That's confusing to everybody involved. But the bottom line is that we need alliance, we need bridges. We need both models to know what is normal and what is not normal. And if midwives, maybe it sounds like more so in your country than mine, if midwives in my country could really be respected as the guardians of normal birth, who are very, very good at catching what is not normal because they see normal all the time. And so when something's not normal, it stands out. Whereas if you're, trained in pathology, like an obstetrician is, and you have your pathology goggles on, if you're looking to find something funky, you find what you look for. Yeah. It's not hard to interpret the shadows on an ultrasound as something questionable if you're looking for something to be wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Here as well, midwives are, trained with the medical model. They're not kind of sent out to home births. They're trained in hospitals and, like normal midwifery here, there certainly are a lot of differences between this country and yours, but midwives are under threat here, serious threat, and their autonomy and their value and their knowledge is being eroded all of the time, and it's quite frightening.
Yeah, here too.
We're really worried for that and what that might mean for the future, because currently we don't even have enough midwives.
Mm-hmm.
There's a serious midwife shortage in this country, and like I say, most of them are trained as medical models, and most of them are, they do treat birth as pathological.
Totally. Well, they have, to survive in their model, they have to be medical, which is just a part of the same umbrella. Well, we do need to wrap up. But yeah, thank you. I loved your stories. And like you said, what an awesome full circle to go from your first birth in the hospital, really not knowing anything about it, and just having your body have this experience, and then circling all the way back to transferring after your second free birth and discharging yourself and saying, I don't need to be a part of this system anymore. Nothing's wrong. It's so cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. It was a pleasure.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.